A comprehensive investigation by DFR Lab and OpenMinds exposes a vast coordinated Russian bot network exploiting Telegram to disseminate pro-Russian and anti-Ukrainian propaganda across the occupied territories. This is what we're going to be discussing today with one of the lead authors of that report, Yuliia Dukach. She leads the Disinformation Investigations at OpenMinds, focusing on cognitive threats, intelligence, and response, ensuring that their research translates into real-world impact. That's what makes the work of OpenMinds unique, as it combines analysis and reporting with the clear intention to counter Russian disinformation operations. Previously, Yuliia worked at Texty, where she uncovered the hidden mechanisms of influence, such as the lingering presence of Soviet-era street names before Ukraine's decommunization efforts. Now she's fully immersed in one of Ukraine's most pressing challenges, that is Russian information warfare, tackling disinformation at scale, working with big data, machine learning, and AI-driven detection methods. Yuliia, welcome to the channel. Welcome back to the channel, I should say, because this is our second conversation.
Thank you for having me here today.
And this is an absolutely fascinating report. And I've been interested in Telegram for some time as a tool of the Russian state, in fact, not just to monitor people's messages and get intelligence. I'm sure it's used for that purpose, but it's also a megaphone. It's also a way of creating targeted echo chambers, which Russian propaganda can then leverage. Why do you think Telegram is so important? And, are we really deluded if we look at it as just another social platform that has a neutral status?
Let's remember that Telegram is one of the main sources of information and news in Ukraine and in Russia. That's why Telegram is the number one platform to try to have an impact on your audience through some specific narratives, through some specific campaigns. And that's why Telegram is really important to investigate deeper, just because we know that his owner is also have some Russian ties, and we have some evidences that Telegram can collaborate with Russian special forces. Therefore, some Ukrainian investigators say that Telegram is something like a small spy in your pocket. But also Telegram is the number one platform for Russian propaganda because of low level of moderation and because of high presence of different Russian information campaigns, especially when we are talking about temporary occupied territories of Ukraine, just because there Russia created hundreds of Telegram channels just in first months after full-scale invasion, and that's why Russia tries to control information area of those regions and also try to influence public opinion through comments and bots, and that's what we actually try to investigate together with DFR Lab.
And what is it about their work that really complements the operations of Open Minds? Because it'd be good to understand a little bit more about the sort of intent and style and impact of both these organizations.
Oh, it was a great collaboration just because DFR Lab are well known because of their great investigation about like technical side of those information operations and with a really deep understanding of Russian propaganda and Russian narratives. And for us, it was important to highlight from one side the technical part, just because when we are talking about bot network, we are talking about like big scale information campaigns, more than 3 million of comments published just in 1 year and 4 months. And that's why it's really interesting to understand how they can do it. And also, it's important to understand what exactly they want to achieve through these operations, and that's why different labs they really like jumped in with their understanding of and their like easy explanation of how it works and why commands are important and how Russian information operations actually achieve their goals. And that's why we actually collaborated as two organizations who works a lot with big data, with technical side, and with deeper understanding of Russian narratives, Russian language skills, and also with together we try to have an impact on different decision makers and to improve their understanding why it's important to investigate and to defend ourselves from Russian impacts. And it's not only Ukrainian case, it's also European case.
And the occupied territories are particularly important. It seems to be a kind of laboratory in some ways for Russian disinformation. So, why is it that these occupied territories are so critical to this? And why is Telegram the tool of choice for trying to disseminate Russian propaganda messages?
Let's remember that right after the occupation, Russia made everything to control information area in those occupied regions. They canceled Ukrainian media. They switched to Russian internet providers. They even started to control like mobile connection and even mobile internet. And therefore, we understand that they did everything to control information for those people who still stay on those occupied territories. And for us, it's really important to understand how quickly and how efficiently Russia can control it. Just because we understand that, you know, in like today with all the globalization and internet and VPN possibilities, you think that it is like it's not possible to control everything. But when we are looking into occupied territories, we understand that it is much more difficult that we can imagine when we stay somewhere in Europe. And that's why we analyze the strategy, and we saw, for example, that in like first 3 weeks, Russia created more than 100 Telegram channels for occupied territories, which masqueraded local news outlets. Or, for example, we see that just in 1 year, there were already more than 600 of different Telegram channels created specifically for different occupied cities. And they tried to disseminate their own propaganda, their own narratives. But what we also see is that they try to shape public opinion through comment sections. And, for example, right from this investigation, we saw that in some cases, more than 20% of all comments which were left in these Telegram channels on occupied territories were made by Russian bots. It means that they really try to control everything, and they try to ban or even bullying with these bots some alternative voices or some pro-Ukrainian voices. And for me, as for like Ukrainian investigator, it's really difficult to hear about this like so-called laboratory for investigation on these occupied territories. But we also understand that it's really important to understand the ways how Russia make it its influence, and how can we defend ourselves, and how we can actually turn back the territories after the occupation. And there are so many interesting questions we need to ask and try to find answers.
The scale of the bot network is just remarkable. So I think you've listed here 3,634 automated accounts. This is a huge number, and I would imagine it takes a certain amount of resource to build that, both the physical resource and the server farms, etc. But also quite a number of sort of programmers and I guess disinformation kind of experts. Is this one of the largest operations, do you think, or is this just the tip of the iceberg? Is Russia putting a lot more into this in other territories and other arenas?
It's not the largest, obviously. We remember that there was operation, for example, in TikTok in 2023 when Russia created more than 12,000 TikTok accounts to disseminate for European audiences fakes about Ukrainian corruption. I remember when I investigated a TikTok farm in Ukraine with more than 2,000 accounts created to discredit recruitment processes to Ukrainian army. And now we see again like more than 3,000 accounts created to disseminate their narratives. But I would say that it is really the tip of the iceberg just because this farm was quite easily detectable just because it was AI powered. They rewrote these comments with AI, with large language models. So they generated these comments, and that's why we can say that among all their comments, at least third part of those comments was unique. Every third comment was unique. It means that they, for today, they use possibilities of generative AI, but it was easily detectable just because these bots they didn't interact with other users. They just like put their narratives and they just went out of this comment section. And that's why they were easily detectable. But we know that there are AI-powered bots which communicate a lot, which actually create this like discussion, but it's really difficult to detect them and to analyze. And that's why it's like just only small part of those artificial activities which are highly used by Russia for different audiences in Ukraine, in the occupied territories, in European country, in different languages. That's why it's really important to investigate them, highlight, and even if it's tip of the iceberg, we understand that it is still the iceberg and we can see it.
That's fascinating, actually, that it's largely a sort of automated set of responses that are being used here, because one wonders how effective this is, whether people actually react to this as if they're real people or whether it's just flooding the zone. Um, and perhaps it sounds like they're not that strategically concerned whether people believe this or not. They're just trying to degrade the informational environment, perhaps. What's your take on the strategic purpose of this?
I think it's about cognitive psychology. We remember that we have this bias when we see something many times, we believe in these narratives. And even if we don't believe, we just think that these specific narratives is highly popular among our society. It means that if we face some specific comments for many times, even if we understand that some of them are bots, we still think that there are many people who believe in things as they are written in those comments. It's really difficult to measure the impact of such operations, and that's why it's always like discussable about like, so what, there are so many bots, so many comments, but no one believes them. But how you can prove that they had their impact or they hadn't? At least we see that they actually spam our information area with their own narratives, and it means that they are dangerous for us just because they can be look like it's some kind of truth for very specific target audiences, and that's why we cannot just ignore them.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because where you have, say, Russian diaspora, um, the use of Telegram and other channels, you know, Russians will understand that people have other sources of information and they can't necessarily block that. So when they're trying to create an echo chamber, they know that it's an environment of potential competition. Here, however, maybe they're assigning bots in some ways because actually they have far more control over the information environment. So your report details some of the ways in which people have been moved on to Russian telecommunications companies, forced to adopt that. And of course, there'll be severe punishments for anyone who carries on trying to access Ukrainian owned network. They're blocking satellites, they're blocking communications. So in some ways, they're trying to create a closed space. Could you sort of detail, why they're doing that and the effectiveness of that when combined with, this sort of Telegram bot network?
Yes, today algorithms of different social media platforms, they are really helpful for authoritarian regimes, much more helpful than for democracies, just because these echo chambers, they are much more effective than like a great Chinese firewall if we will try to make something similar for other countries, which are still included into like wider internet. And that's why we understand that Russia collaborate with Telegram. We have some evidences of their collaboration. We understand that Telegram is a platform with open their API, and that's why it's really easy to create a great monitoring system of Telegram. And if we look at these examples of those bots, they actually, what they're doing, they monitor thousands of different Telegram channels. And when in first minutes after new publication, under those publication and comment section, we see Russian bots. It means that they monitor everything like in real time. They check if some newly created posts have some keywords. And if some keywords included in those posts, they like go into comment section and push their own narratives with these bots. And these narratives, they look like, no, they look quite natural just because they have like a big rules, what topics can be highlighted under which keywords. And they are also first commenters. It means that if you like some common user will go to comments, you will see like first 5 publication made by bots, and it will be like your first touch with this comment section. And it means that it's really easy to work with Telegram with automated technical possibilities to push your narratives. And for Russia, it's really helpful just because those bots, they are active on the occupied territory under Russian channels, under Russian like mainstream media, but they are also active in Ukrainian medias if their comment section open for different publications. It means that they work not only on territory under their control. It means that they work a lot under some liberal media in Russia, under Ukrainian media, Ukrainian bloggers. And we see that it really can be an effective way to control their narrative through aggressive commenting and discussing their own position.
And your report notes that there are three core types of propaganda. Of course, there is the anti-Ukrainian propaganda, as one would expect, but there's a huge segment of pro-Russian propaganda. Well, it'd be good to break that down in a minute, what it focuses on, whether it's sort of, cultural exceptionalism or, the pensions and social services, etc. So that's interesting. But then there's this other category we'll tackle first, which I don't quite understand, what it's for and what it contains. And this is abstract anti-war messaging. So what's that one all about?
Yeah, we try to, so we analyze this more than 300,000 of comments in the occupied territories, and we try to classify them somehow. And so first of all, we found that there is a really huge part of these pro-Russian narratives. And it's maybe can be obviously, but what wasn't so obvious that in the occupied channels, they had much more pro-Russian comments than in channels in Russia. It means that they try to make this visibility of pro-Russian audience and pro-Russian population in this occupied territory through bots. And those pro-Russian messages we can split into two categories. The first one is quite simple pro-Russian narratives about Putin, about Russian government, about Russia is the greatest country in the world, like Russian government is the best, like Putin is the strongest leader, and we have to vote for him or something like this. So it's like it's about great pro-Russian narratives, and they are not so specific, but more like a worldwide things about something good about Russia, Russian diplomacy, Russian partners, Russian governments, or something like this. But the second part was specifically created for occupied territories. It was about very specific topics, for example, about water supply, that local government do their best to create the ideal place for living. And for example, the part of those narratives that Crimea or other cities were the part of Russian cultural space for many, many years, even before the occupation. But they also talking about the improving of mobile connection. They are talking about the increasing the amount of pensions and other social policies in occupation. So they try to create this bubble, this like illusion of of the best place to live in this world. Like, this occupied cities by Russia is the best place to live. It's about their cultural policies, about their diplomacy, their ecological problems which are solved by local authorities. So we are talking about very specific messages created specifically for people in the occupied territories. And it was a great part of bot activities in those channels.
How important is it then that these are local kind of issues that are focused on? Because what I find fascinating in Russia itself, of course, you don't really have any anti-war protests. You don't really have anything that could constitute a meaningful civic society or even a political society. But occasionally you do get protests, but often they're channeled through environmental issues. Often they're channeled through local issues, or they will protest against maybe some corrupt local politician or some local scandal. That seems to be, and even that's not really tolerated anymore. Is it an understanding that actually people will not protest on the big issues, but they may use smaller local grievances as a sort of conduit for protest? Is that part of their thinking?
It's difficult to imagine what they're actually thinking about. But what for me important is to understand that, for example, there are some topics which can look like reactive topics. For example, restoring water supply. We can make a hypothesis that this topic that like local authorities do their best to restore water supply, and just in few hours everything will be okay. So we see such kind of comment, and we can imagine that this comment was made when some problems existed in some city for a very short period of time, and they tried to react to this like negative situation with their bot accounts. But when we analyze the dynamics of this topic, like restoring water supply in occupied territories, we see that it was one of the most like stable topics presented in bot activities. It means that they don't face some short problem and react to it, but it means that they try to create the solution if even city faces problems with water supply for many months, they still push their narrative that everything is okay and everything will be okay in the shortest period of time, and they will publish it under each post with this keyword water or something like this, and they will push their narratives like they are reacting, but we understand that they are not, just because this problem is still exists. And in this situation, I think that we can actually don't understand who are the target audience of those posts. And I can imagine that this narrative created not for population on the occupied territories, but maybe it is created for Russians who are interested somehow in the situation in occupied regions. And if they will open, like from St. Petersburg, they just open local telegram channels for Nova Kakhovka, and they will see this illusion that everything is perfect there. And even if they face some problems with, I don't know, water supply or electricity or something like this, they will see comments like from common users from those territories that, oh no, we faced it for like few hours and then everything was okay. So thank you, like our local authorities, that you're making our life better or something like this. That's why I'm not sure that it's about like those possibilities to protest, just because Russian special services, they actually do everything to make it impossible to have a protest on the occupied territories for today. But I think it's about their trying to control information areas and simulate like normality for different target audiences.
And it's extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, there will be some people, of course, there are who are pro-Russian. There will be some people who remain in that territory who have been sort of brainwashed. But it seems hardly credible that the core message you're talking about here, which is themes that praise Russian culture, themes that praise the provision of social services, themes that say, Russian governance is such a huge improvement on, when you were under Ukrainian governments. People living in the territory who have any kind of memory whatsoever must know that things are dramatically worse now. So it really, makes you think as to whether, any of this works in the territory itself.
It will be great if all people could remember everything and not switch their worldview according to more popular narratives for today. Just because, a huge part of bot comments was about Ukrainian Nazism or radical nationalism, and they really tried to like share this vision of Ukraine as a Nazi state for people who lived in Ukraine before Russian occupation. They really try to create this illusion of there. It's not even illusion, it's about interpretation of history, interpretation of some wording, interpretation of symbols. They try to replace this interpretation with their own. They try to, we know that one of the first things that they did after the occupations, it's closing Ukrainian media and walking into schools and replacing all educational stuffs and activities and materials with their own. It means that they are working with narrative, they are working with their interpretation, and they try to make it as popular as possible with in different ways. That's why they control like Telegram channels who try to inform local population with some news together with Russian narratives. They control bots who pretend that they are real users with their own thinkings or hypotheses or ideas or facts or something like this. And they also control other sources of information, like from TV to some pseudo opposition, for example, created to disseminate the same narrative, to be honest. And that's why it's really about like a big bubble created by a big state to control everything. And even if you're still got some information from independent sources or from Ukrainian sources, for example, you still feel yourself as minority in your local community. And I think it's the number one goal for Russian government to achieve on the occupied territories, to create this feeling of minority, of weakness, and impossibility to change at least something.
And of course, they did that highly successfully in Belarus, where through a mixture of sort of, terror and punishing individuals who did stand up, and then convincing the rest that yeah, we're the bad guys, but there's nothing you can do about that, and you're on your own, and no one's coming to save you. And that, unfortunately, had a high degree of success there. And it also taps into something the report suggests that what Russia is doing here is manufacturing a consensus. Now, some people will recognize that that's a phrase from a relatively interesting book by a man who has some highly dubious views, certainly on this war as well, which is Noam Chomsky. How far is this concept of manufacturing a kind of consensus a key part of this? And I also found it fascinating that these bots avoid dialogue. So really, it's yes, you're building a consensus, but they don't really want to engage people or persuade. It's a one-way informational street.
They actually don't communicate just because they cannot, because of technology behind them. They just have a big database of themes, and they have a like list of keywords and monitoring system, and they just push their own narratives according to keywords under some posts, and just leave from these channels. That's why this communication and dialogue, it's it's the work for another kind of bots which are more expensive according to technology behind them. And they are much better, they are much effective, but they are more difficult to produce in big scale in comparison with this kind of farm. But still, if we are talking about manufacturing consensus, the dialogue is just only one part of this process. Another part is like a public information which is normalized and legitimized by different sources. That's why it's like consensus is about all these channels which are just rewrite or forward messages from Russian medias. It's about bots which actually just simulate their own ideas but just go in parallel with the same narratives. And that's why, for example, for me it was really interesting to see, as you already mentioned, that some part of those comments were pro-Russian, some part anti-Ukrainian and anti-Western, but they also pushed neutral narratives. Like, we want some kind of peace, we want negotiation, and not talking about like Russian ideas of negotiations. So some of those bots, they try to influence through very like positive kind of stuff without any politics behind them. We just so tired of this war. We just want to live in peace, and we will not talk about living in peace under which government, for example. And I think it's about this like some kind of trying to pretend that they are more humankind. And when you feel some emotions about, this, is it when you're tired, or when you're afraid, or when you're feeling even some positive emotions, you have less level of critical thinking. And it means that when bots pretend that they're human, and they try to make you feel some kind of fear or some kind of danger or some kind of tears, even if they are only presented as emojis from those bots. You're more ready to take other Russian narratives without any criticism. And it's really interesting how they try to look like people, but they are still pushing very artificial narratives. And by the way, I even have a collection of very strange wording of those comments created by generative AI. You know that you still cannot use generative AI without supervising it. And it means that in some very specific situation, they really failed, and they call in Putin as terrorists because of wording of those generative AI, and that because of mistakes behind them. And for me, it was really strange, and I thought, like, is it really Russian bot? I will check other comments. Okay, it's still Russian, but they just call Russia as a terrorist state. I think that they wanted to write something about Ukraine the same, but they failed. And for today, we see that sometimes I don't know which exactly large language model behind this bot operation. We cannot investigate it. We cannot detect. We just see generated text, but we cannot say that it is OpenAI model or Grok or their own Russian large language models. We know that they have their own some, but we still don't know which exactly they use. But sometimes they fail because of very specific aggressive narratives, and this large language models, they just fail.
One of the ones you highlighted in the report, which I found horribly sort of ironic, but it does suggest that maybe they don't have access to the best technology and resources. And one of these comments was, Lord, how wonderful that Putin advocates for the use of peaceful weapons. I mean, it's just an absolute absurdity, which, if anyone's got, their wits about them, will look at that and go, well, that's something that's very broken, making those kind of comments. And of course, Russia doesn't necessarily have access to the best AI resources, and certainly it doesn't really have much in the way of an indigenous AI industry. Although, of course, the China and the US do, so it may well be using some of those models. Another interesting technique here is the quoting not just Russian sources like Izvestia and RIA Novosti, TASS and all this, but also New York Times, or the New Orc Times as it is more commonly known amongst those fighting disinformation. It's interesting how they try to sort of perhaps get some of this echo chamber information into foreign press, or if there's something that they see as sort of beneficial or complementary in the foreign press, they try to bring that in to sort of get validation for their propagandistic methods and messages.
It's really interesting to see how, like Russian propaganda, they actually like to criticize Western media and talking that they are propagandists, not Russians. But when they see some complimentary text on New York Times or other media, some complimentary for Russia, they really love to use it to legitimize their own position. And unfortunately, we are talking now about New York Times, which was mentioned a lot in bot comments because of some publication which were complementary to Russian position from very specific perspective. And we are talking at that moment when in Ukraine we again make a lot of discussion around another text of New York Times, and this time it's to the journalist work from Russian point of view in Kursk Oblast. And again we see that it's really maybe we have maybe New York Times really have some problems, just because I believe that this publication will be mentioned by newly created bots again, just because they really love to use this Western media because of their, aura around them, of like journalism or like global perspective on this situation, and they really love to use them to prove their own position, just because they widely know, even in Russia, like a great name. And in other situations, they just mention Regnum or other Russian sources. But when they see some complementary texts in Western media, first of all, New York Times, they will cite them a lot in their comments, in their Telegram posts, in their Russian media, and like from Simonyan to Solovyov. And it means that they really love to use this kind of manipulation of like combining cherry picking, taking only one paper to prove their own position and ignoring dozens of others.
Yes, the New York Times is infamous, I think. And if you go back in history to the days of Walter Duranty and the efforts to cover up the Holodomor, it is infamous for having some really terrible, terrible people working for it. And that includes the German correspondent you're talking about with Russian ancestry, who is lives in Moscow, which I find extraordinary that they'd have a correspondent who is residing in Moscow, openly working for them. Um, because that person is even if they're well intentioned, they're vulnerable to all sorts of pressure. This person, I suspect, is not well intentioned. Um, she took and participated in an extraordinary um, photo shoot. I think it was last year that produced quite an iconic image, but an absolutely staged image that seemed to present a wounded Russian service person almost as a sort of Christ-like figure. It was laid out as if it was some kind of great master painting. I mean, this is pure propaganda, but unfortunately, that got an awful lot of traction in some Western media, and it won some photographic prizes. Unfortunately, it seems that people who work in the arts are far less critical, and their moral compass is slightly skewed when it comes to their implied rights to enjoy art and all that. So, a bit of a rant there, but this is the corresponding talking about a clear out and out propagandist. What also I think your report mentions is the anti-Ukrainian messaging. And I think it's absolutely fascinating how much of it focuses on Zelensky. 50,000 comments mentioning Zelensky from highly personal attacks. Now, we've seen Russian propaganda do that over and over again, but also they're latching on to these claims of tyranny, which is, of course, extraordinarily ironic for Russia to be saying that, or to be criticizing Zelensky as not having a democratic mandate. Again, the irony is just off the scale. But why do you think they're focusing on this? And do they think it has some kind of traction with Ukrainians?
I think that for them, Zelensky is the greatest symbol of Ukraine, abstract West, and altogether. Just because we remember that those operations are created by Russia, who have their own like cultural code, and according to their own worldview, I imagine that they have this like Putin as a saint, and like the idol of everything, and it is something that if you will discredit Putin, you will discredit everything in Russia. And I think that they imagine that in Ukraine we have the same situation. And if they will discredit Zelensky, they will like destroy everything. They will destroy support. They will destroy democratic institutes. And it means that they have quite like low understanding of what is going on in our heads and our institutions. But also they quoted Zelensky in every six comment in the occupied territory. Every sixth comment mentioned Zelensky. And Zelensky was starting from a drug dealer till a tyrant, autocrat, Nazi, and that Zelensky kills his own people, everything. So they had a great variety of topic around Zelensky, and they tried to like push them everywhere, even if those Zelensky wasn't presented as a keyword, but in any mention of Ukraine, they tried to push like Zelensky, Nazi state, Nazi symbols, aggressive nationalists. So they had like some number of most popular topic which were targeted Ukraine and Ukrainian partners. And by the way, it's really interesting to see which persons were mentioned in those comments. Just because the number one is Zelensky, yeah, up to 50,000 comments with Zelensky. On the second place, obviously Putin, because of pro-Russian narratives and Putin as a strong leader, and that Putin does everything to like make the occupied territories' lives better. But if we will look at other most mentioned persons, we will see like Boris Johnson, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, and a lot of representatives of Ukrainian partners and other countries. So they just used some names which are well known to create those narratives more personalized and more like, you do not need to talk about abstract West if you already mention like Joe Biden, for example. So it is a really easy way to talk about their like war with NATO and the West through all these personas, or Boris Johnson, who is, according to bots, who started this war, and Ukraine is only puppet of Boris Johnson or something like this. And the most interesting thing is to understand that pro-Russian narratives are much less personalized. If we will take pro-Russian narratives and count all the persons which were mentioned there, there will be only Putin and like maybe Mishustin a few times. But if we are talking about anti-Western and anti-Ukrainian narratives, you will see a variety of persons who are demonized through bots. It means that in Russia, they really don't love to make big campaigns for other politicians than Putin, just because of this autocracy, because of hierarchy. Putin will not give the possibility to other politicians to promote themselves through big-scale operations on the occupied territories. You will not see Aksionov in Crimean Telegram channels when those bots are created not in Crimea but on the wider scale. And I think that for us it's something important to understand about this hierarchy and about this autocracy and how it works, and why Putin is the most famous person and why others are silenced by this kind of operations.
Well, the last sort of question to get an understanding of how this works, is there a demonstrable sort of uptick or increase in the amount of bot activity when it coincides with key events? So that may be an offensive, or it may be an announcement by Trump, as we've had just yesterday. Do you see sort of patterns of increase in intensity of these activities based on key events and key trends?
It's difficult to speak about intensity just because you have to monitor them and understand that even Telegram blocks bot accounts because of their artificial activities, and they are replaced easily with others, and it means that you always have to investigate and to look for more bot accounts, and it's really difficult to monitor them all. That's why I cannot say about intensity, but what I can say it's about new trends in Ukrainian Telegram channels, and they are connected to mobilization process. And it is one of the most successful topics, unfortunately, successful topics of Russian information operations for Ukrainian audience. It's the criticism of mobilization and recruitment to Ukrainian army. And they did a lot for demonization of recruitment officers. Even after the real case of problems of recruitment in Ukraine, Russia did a lot to scale these examples and to create this illusion of representativity of those cases to all mobilization processes in Ukraine. And after last missile attacks and drone attacks in Kiev and other cities, not only Kiev, we see that Russia started to attack places where recruitment actually conducts, like recruitment offices. They started to attack them with drone and missiles, and they try through boats and through their like pro-Russian, hiddenly pro-Russian Telegram channels, they try to create illusion that Ukrainians are happy because of Russia hitting recruitment officers in Ukraine. That they even created some fakes about, the signs on drones that from Odessa population to like recruitment officers or something like this. They try to create these fakes and put them through TikTok, Telegram, or other social media platform to make them visible and to create this illusion that there is a really wide support of Russian attacks in Ukraine. It sounds really strange, but they really try to create this, like that so many people in Ukraine, they are hiding from recruitment and they are happy because of Russia targeting recruitment officers with their drones. But we understand that it is mostly Russian information operations and not real Ukrainian situation.
Now that's a real piece of projection there, isn't it? Because we have seen images of Voenkomat in Russia or the recruitment offices being actually burnt down by Russians so maybe they look at this and go, oh well, that must be happening on the other side as well. It's a fascinating report. We're going to put a link to the OpenMinds site in the description of the video. I hope people will be able to download the report, dive into some of the detail because it's absolutely fascinating. And of course, they can discover many other in-depth reports that you publish as an organization. For today, though, Yuliia, thank you so much for coming back on.
Yeah, thank you.